What if Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Seven Kingdoms, had looked across the great hall of Winterfell on that cold northern evening and seen not a problem but a solution? What if, beneath all the feasting and the wine and the broad bellowing laughter, he had been calculating? What if the king who the realm believed thought only of glory and boar hunting had, in that particular moment, been thinking 3 moves ahead? The snow falls on Winterfell, as it always has, steady, patient, indifferent to the ambitions of men. The banners of the stag and the direwolf hang side by side in the great hall, their edges trembling faintly in the draught from the doors. Robert Baratheon sits at the high table, enormous and vital, a man who still fills a room the way a fire fills a hearth, with heat, with light, with the constant, low threat of burning something down. He drinks, he laughs, he slaps his knee at some jest from a knight whose name he will not remember by morning. And yet his eyes move even now. Even in the middle of the feast, his eyes move. He has been watching Ned Stark all evening. The request comes later, in the quieter hours, when the torches have burned lower and the hall has thinned of all but the most devoted drinkers. Robert summons Ned to his solar, with a gesture so casual it might be an afterthought, and yet nothing about it is an afterthought. Ned Stark climbs the stairs to that room the way a man climbs toward a verdict. He is not afraid of Robert, but he knows, as he has always known, that Robert in a private room is a different creature entirely from Robert at the feast. The king he loves is the one from the war, from the rebellion, from the knights crouched around a fire with nothing but swords between them and ruin. This Robert, the one behind closed doors, the one who still wears the crown. This Robert is something Ned has never fully learned to read. The fire is high. The wine has been poured but not yet touched. Robert speaks without ceremony. That is his way. He says that he wants to do something for Jon, that the boy deserves better than the life a bastard is given in this world. He says Jon is a good lad, and anyone with eyes can see it. And Robert has always had eyes for good men, even if the realm doubts it. He says there is a girl, a Tyrell girl, young, clever, from what he hears the finest piece of political currency Highgarden has produced in a generation. He says he wants Ned to allow Jon to be legitimized, to become Jon Stark in the eyes of the law and the realm, and then to take Margaery Tyrell to wife. He does not finish laying out the plan before Ned begins to understand it. He does not need to, because Robert's fear is not the wildlings. It is not the Dothraki across the narrow sea, not even the whispers of dragons returning to the world. Robert's fear has a name, and the name is Lannister. Tywin Lannister, who has loaned the crown more gold than the crown can ever reasonably repay, who sits in Casterly Rock like a spider at the center of a web that stretches through every corridor of the Red Keep. Cersei is the thread closest to the king, but Tywin is the hand that holds it. And Robert knows, Robert has always known, that he is surrounded, that the men closest to him belong, in ways both spoken and unspoken, to someone else. What he needs are friends, real ones, the kind who are loyal to him, not because he has paid them or promoted them or given them a daughter in marriage, but because their interests are genuinely, structurally aligned with his own survival. The Tyrells are ambitious without being treacherous. The North is loyal in a way that borders on religion. If he could bind Highgarden and Winterfell together through a marriage, and tie both of them through that marriage to the throne, he would have a counterweight, something to press against the Lannister scales, something that breathes and thinks, and has its own reasons to keep Robert Baratheon alive and wearing his crown. It is, even Ned must admit, standing there by the fire, a surprisingly elegant idea for a man so often dismissed as a blunt instrument. But Ned Stark is not thinking about the politics, not entirely. He is thinking about a woman who died in a bed of blood, and a promise made in the last moments of her life, and a secret that has lived inside him like a wound that never fully closed. Jon is not his son. Jon is something else entirely, something so dangerous that the wrong revelation, made at the wrong moment, could bring the whole realm to war. Legitimization would bring scrutiny. A high-profile marriage would bring scrutiny. Eyes that were once content to glance past a northern bastard would now study Jon Stark with the full, unflinching attention of the realm. And yet, a legitimate name is a kind of armor. A powerful wife is a kind of shield. If the secret must be kept, it is better kept by a man with allies than by a man the world has already dismissed. Ned stares into the fire for a long time before he answers. When he finally speaks, his voice is quiet. He says he will need to think on it. But Robert, who has known Ned Stark for 30 years, hears something else beneath those careful words. He hears the beginning of yes. The decree arrives before the Tyrells do. It comes sealed in wax the color of old blood, bearing the stag of House Baratheon pressed deep and deliberate into its surface, and when Maester Luwin breaks it open in the great hall of Winterfell, the words inside carry the full weight of a king's authority. Jon Snow, and that name will never be spoken aloud in this hall again, not in the way it once was, is henceforth, and by royal command, to be known as Jon Stark, true-born son of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell, legitimized by decree of Robert of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm. The words do not ask. They do not request or suggest. They simply declare, the way mountains declare themselves against the sky, immovable, final, already true. If you are enjoying this alternate history of Westeros, please make sure to subscribe because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's get back to the story. Jon stands very still while Luwin reads. He does not allow himself to look at Robb. He does not allow himself to look at anyone. He is aware, with the particular acuity of a man who has spent his entire life learning to take up as little space as possible, that every eye in the hall is on him. He feels the weight of it like a physical thing, like snow accumulating on a roof, silent and heavy, and full of the promise of eventual collapse. Robb is the one who moves first. He crosses the hall with his long stark stride, and there is a moment, just a moment, where the watching crowd holds its collective breath, wondering what a true-born heir does when the world rearranges itself around him. Robb takes his brother's arm. He calls him by name, the new name. He says it clearly, without hesitation, the way a man plants a flag in uncertain ground. There are those in the hall who find this generous. There are those who find it calculated. Robb Stark is young, but he is not naive, and he understands that how he receives this moment will define how others speak of him for years to come. He does both things at once, the generous thing and the calculated thing, and the fact that they are the same thing is not a coincidence. He is his father's son. Catelyn Stark watches from the gallery above. She does not descend. Sansa finds a way to smile that does not reach her eyes. Arya, unpredictable as weather, looks at Jon with something raw and real and says nothing at all, which somehow says everything. Bran watches from his place at the high table with the solemn attention of a child who is beginning to understand that the world is more complicated than the stories made it seem. And Jon stands in the center of all of it, holding his new name like a stone he does not yet know the weight of, trying to breathe. The Tyrells arrive 3 days later. They come in force, not an army, but something that produces a similar effect on those watching from the walls of Winterfell. There are wagons draped in green and gold. There are knights in polished armor, riding destriers that have never known the cold of the north and are already unimpressed by it. There are servants and retainers and ladies in waiting, and one remarkably ornate, covered litter that sways through the gate with the confidence of something that expects to be accommodated. The North watches all of this with the particular expression the North reserves for things it finds excessive and faintly suspect. The North does not say this. The North merely observes, with the same patient silence it applies to most things, that roses do not generally grow in this soil. Margaery Tyrell steps out of that litter and into the gray Winterfell light, and something unexpected happens. She does not flinch. She looks up at the ancient stone walls, at the cold sky pressing down from above, at the gathered faces of northern lords and their silent appraisal, and she meets all of it with a warmth so genuine and so precisely calibrated that it becomes genuinely difficult to determine where one quality ends and the other begins. She is beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful, not merely in their surface appearance, but in their absolute fitness for purpose. She was built for this, not for Winterfell specifically, but for exactly this kind of moment. The arrival, the assessment, the first impression that must be made and held and shaped before anyone else has time to impose their own narrative. Jon meets her in the yard because Ned tells him to, and because even a man who spent his formative years learning to disappear understands that some moments cannot be avoided. He is wearing his best clothes, which in the scale of Tyrell finery register somewhere between modest and invisible, and he is standing with the precise stillness of a man who has decided that if he can not match what she represents, he will at least not embarrass himself trying. He watches her cross the yard toward him, and he thinks, with the clarity of a first impression that will later prove remarkably accurate, that she is the most dangerous person he has ever met. He thinks this not with fear, but with something closer to recognition. She offers him her hand. She smiles, and the smile is warm and searching and faintly amused, as if she has already read several things about him that he did not intend to make legible. He takes her hand. He says it is an honor. She says she has heard a great deal about him. He says he cannot imagine what there is to hear. She tilts her head slightly at that, and the amusement in her eyes sharpens into something more deliberate, more attentive. She says, very quietly, that she finds that particular kind of modesty either deeply genuine or deeply strategic, and that she intends to spend the coming days determining which. She says this lightly, pleasantly, as if it is not a declaration of intent. It is absolutely a declaration of intent. Jon does not know what to say to that. He has faced wildlings on the practice ground and come away knowing how to answer them. He does not know how to answer this. He says nothing, and she receives his silence with the grace of someone who has learned that silence, interpreted correctly, tells you more than speech. Somewhere behind Margaery, making her way across the yard at a pace that suggests she is in no particular hurry because the world will wait for her, comes the Lady Olenna Tyrell. She is smaller than her reputation, and her reputation is enormous. She moves through Winterfell with the eyes of a woman who has spent 7 decades cataloging the weaknesses of everyone she has ever encountered, and sees no reason to stop now. She looks at the castle. She looks at the cold. She looks at Jon Stark standing before her granddaughter, and she is quiet for a long moment in the way that only very intelligent people are quiet. Not absently, not politely, but with the focused intensity of someone performing rapid and thorough calculations. Later that evening, when the feast has run its course, and the candles have burned low, and the Northern Lords have retired to beds that Olenna has privately assessed as aggressively uncomfortable, she sits with Margaery in the chambers they have been given, and she speaks plainly. She says she has watched Jon Stark for the duration of an entire feast, and she has reached a conclusion. She says he is either the most genuinely honorable man in Westeros, which would make him rare and possibly useful, or he is the most skilled performer of honor she has encountered in a long life of encountering performers, which would make him considerably more interesting than she had anticipated. Margaery asks which she believes. Olenna is quiet for a moment. Then she says, it does not matter. She says that either way, he is worth the gamble. She says there is something behind those gray eyes that she cannot quite reach, something that sits at the back of him like a locked door, and that in her considerable experience, locked doors in men like that are either empty or full of things that could change the course of everything. Margaery looks into the fire. She thinks about the yard, about the silence Jon offered her in lieu of the flattery she has received from 100 other men, about the way he held himself as though he had learned stillness the way other people learn to breathe. She thinks about what it means to build a future with a man like that, a man who does not yet know what he is or what he might become. She thinks about it for a long time, and then she does something that surprises her grandmother. She laughs, not a court laugh, not a performance, but something genuine and low and full of something that might, in another light, be recognized as anticipation. She says she would like to walk with him tomorrow, if the cold permits. Olenna watches her granddaughter's face and says nothing, but she reaches out and sets her hand over Margaery's, briefly, with the weight of something that is not quite approval and not quite warning. It sits somewhere between the two, in that careful particular space where the wisest counsel always lives. Outside the window, the snow has begun to fall on Winterfell again, soft and relentless, covering everything equally. The old stones and the new names, the roses from the south, and the wolves that have always lived here. Somewhere in the castle, Jon Stark lies awake in the dark, turning his new name over in his mind like a coin he does not yet know the value of, listening to the wind move through the ancient walls, wondering what a man who has always been an answer to someone else's question does when the question finally changes. The morning the vows are spoken, Winterfell wakes beneath a sky the color of old iron. The snow has stopped, as if the weather itself recognizes the weight of the occasion and chooses to hold still. Lords arrive in the great yard with frost on their cloaks and calculation in their eyes, reading the assembled banners the way men of power always read such things, not for beauty, but for meaning. The direwolf of House Stark stands beside the golden rose of Highgarden, and that pairing alone communicates what 6 months of correspondence could not have delivered with half the clarity. The North and the Reach are no longer simply aware of one another, they are bound. The ceremony itself is a thing of deliberate contrasts. Winterfell's sept is modest by southern standards, its stones cold and unadorned, its light filtering through narrow windows rather than cascading through stained glass. And yet the Tyrells have brought the South with them in every detail they are permitted. Flowers preserved in wax and packed across hundreds of miles, soft candles carried from Highgarden's own stores, silks in gold and green draped with enough restraint to suggest respect for northern custom rather than indifference to it. Margaery wears both. A gown rich enough to signal the weight of her house, simple enough to signal that she understands where she stands. She has studied this choice the way a commander studies terrain. Jon Stark, and it is Jon Stark who walks to those vows, not Jon Snow, not the bastard name, not the ghost that name always implied, stands at the altar in dark wool and northern steel. He does not look comfortable. He looks honest, which is perhaps more important. The lords assembled notice it. The lords assembled notice everything. He speaks his vows without hesitation, but without performance either, and those watching him closely understand there is no theater in this man. What he says, he means. What he cannot mean, he will not say. It is, depending on one's perspective, either his greatest virtue or his greatest liability. In the game they are all quietly playing, sincerity is either armor or wound, and which one it becomes depends entirely on who is holding the blade. Margaery speaks her vows with grace. She has always known how to speak with grace. But there is a stillness beneath the performance now, something her septa would not recognize, and Olenna Tyrell would. And it is the stillness of a woman who has decided to be present rather than merely precise. She means some portion of what she says. She is surprised by how much. Cersei Lannister is not in Winterfell. She is in King's Landing, standing at a high window that looks out over Blackwater Bay, and she has been handed the Raven's message and read it and set it down with the controlled calm of a woman who knows that visible fury is spent currency. What she feels does not matter. What she does next does. She turns from the window and she begins, quietly and without announcement, to work. The whispers she plants are precise and patient. Not accusations, not quite, because accusations require evidence, and evidence can be disproven. What she trades in is subtler. She asks questions in the right company. She tilts her head at the right moments and lets silence do what words would do clumsily. A bastard raised to a lord's name by a king's good mood, a northern lord's son who was never quite a lord's son, silk over uncertain origins. She does not say these things directly. She does not need to. She does not finish the thought. She does not need to. In the corridors of the Red Keep, in the solar rooms where influence pools like slow water, the seeds find soil without her ever kneeling to plant them. What she understands, and what she is banking on, is that legitimacy is not a document. It is a consensus, and consensus can be eroded, carefully, from the edges inward, before the center even notices the loss. But Cersei is not in Winterfell, and in Winterfell, the night after the vows, something happens that her whispers cannot yet reach. The bedchamber is not what Margaery expected, not because it is poor. It is warmed and lit with the consideration of a household that has done its best, but because the man sitting across from her near the fire is not performing anything. Jon Stark sits with his elbows on his knees, and he looks at her with the expression of someone who has decided to stop preparing for a conversation and simply have it. He tells her he knows she understands the Game of Thrones better than he does. He says it plainly, not as a concession, not as flattery, but as an observed fact offered honestly. He says he has no particular wish to play it. Margaery is quiet for a moment. She is prepared for many versions of this night. She has not prepared for transparency. She tells him that not wanting to play the game is itself a move in it, and that he should understand that. She says it without cruelty. He considers it. He nods slowly, as though something he already suspected has just been confirmed by someone he is beginning to trust. He asks her what she wants, not what House Tyrell wants, not what the Alliance demands, what she wants. She looks at him across the firelight of Winterfell's ancient stones, and for the first time in longer than she can precisely name, Margaery Tyrell finds that she does not have an answer prepared. Ned Stark rides south with the weight of two secrets, and either one of them could destroy everything he has spent his life building. The first secret is old. It has lived in him for nearly 2 decades, buried beneath the daily work of lordship, beneath the raising of children, beneath the particular silence of a man who has learned to carry a truth so dangerous that even thinking it clearly feels like a kind of treason. Lyanna. Rhaegar. The Tower of Joy, and what he found inside it. The boy he carried home and called his own. That secret has always been there, patient and dormant, like a coal banked low in a hearth, still burning, still capable of consuming, but contained. He has contained it. He has been careful. The second secret is newer, and it is the newer secret that frightens him more. Jon is legitimized now. Jon is Jon Stark of Winterfell, betrothed to Margaery Tyrell, written into the great ledger of the realm's political arrangements by the hand of Robert Baratheon himself. The king's seal, the king's word. And with that elevation comes exposure, not of the truth, not yet, but of the possibility of the truth. There are people in King's Landing who make their living finding gaps in other people's stories. Ned knows this. He has always known this. But knowing it from Winterfell and knowing it from the Red Keep are two entirely different things. The way knowing the sea is cold is different from standing in it. He does not allow himself to think about what the Targaryens were. He does not allow himself to think about the blood in Jon's veins and what it would mean if someone else thought it too. He thinks instead about Jon Arryn, because Jon Arryn is the reason he is on this road, and Jon Arryn is a problem he can actually solve. The investigation begins quietly, the way Ned prefers all investigations to begin. He is not a man who announces himself. He is not a man who makes a show of turning over stones. He simply turns them, one after another, with the patient and methodical thoroughness of someone who grew up watching his father administer the North. Justice as a craft, truth as something you find by eliminating everything that isn't true. He follows the threads that Arryn left behind, the records, the visits to certain parts of the city, the question that Arryn was apparently asking, again and again, before someone decided he should stop asking it. The truth about Joffrey takes longer than it should, and no time at all. Ned is looking at the features of the boy, looking at the lineage of the Baratheons, that vast, dark, physically overwhelming line of men, black-haired and broad-shouldered and loud with life. And he is doing the arithmetic that Arryn must have done. He finds the same answer. He finds it with the same cold clarity that must have settled over Arryn in his final days. That particular stillness of a man who has understood something he cannot unknow. The Queen's children are not the King's children. The crown sits on a head that has no right to it, and the man who sits the Iron Throne, who laughs too loudly and drinks too deeply and loves Robert Baratheon the way a man loves a person he is slowly losing to a version of themselves he doesn't recognize, that man does not know. He does not confront Cersei, not immediately, not alone. This is where the man Ned Stark is in this world diverges from the man he might have been in another, because this time there is more at stake than his own honor. His honor is always at stake. That is simply the condition of being Eddard Stark, the permanent tax of his own nature. But Jon is out there. Jon, with his Tyrell betrothal and his new name and his legitimization sealed in royal wax. And if Ned moves wrong, if he steps forward and plays this as though he is the only piece on the board that matters, then Jon pays the price for it. He thinks about this for a long time. He sits in the room that has been given to him in the Red Keep, the Hand's Tower with its old stone and its windows that look south toward the city. And he thinks about it the way he thinks about everything, completely, without flinching, without looking away from the parts that are painful to see. Then he calls for a raven. 2 ravens, in fact. 2 messages composed with great care in the small hours of the night when the castle sleeps, and the only sounds are the distant sea and the guttering of his candle. He writes them in his own hand, in the particular shorthand he has used with Robb since Robb was old enough to receive letters of consequence. He seals them himself. He gives them to a man he trusts, a man from Winterfell who came south with him and has no loyalties in this city that might compete with the one he was born with. 1 raven flies north, 1 raven flies south. Robb Stark will read his father's words before dawn breaks over Winterfell's gray towers. He will read them and he will understand that the ground beneath the family has shifted, that the careful architecture of the past months is now under pressure from a direction no one anticipated. And in Highgarden, Mace Tyrell will be woken from sleep to receive a letter he does not yet know how to interpret, written in a Northern Lord's hand, courteous and plain and absolutely without decoration, telling him that his daughter's future husband has enemies in the capital who are not content to oppose him openly, telling him that there are forged documents, telling him that someone has gone to considerable trouble to construct a story in which Jon's legitimization is not a royal gift, but a conspiracy, a fraud perpetrated by a grieving king and a loyal friend who loved him enough to lie. The forgeries are elegant. Ned grants them that. Whoever produced them understood that a crude fabrication would be dismissed immediately, that the only forgeries worth fearing are the ones that look exactly like the truth. These look exactly like the truth. They have the right seals, the right language, the right dates. They have been placed carefully in the right hands to be discovered at the right moment. Not yet, not now, but soon, when a challenge to Jon's status would do the maximum damage. When Margaery is committed, but the marriage is not yet solemnized. When Highgarden's honor is already entangled, but their power has not yet been fully brought to bear. It is, Ned thinks, a remarkably precise kind of cruelty. It has the Lannister quality of violence, not the sword, but the document, not the knife, but the rumor placed in exactly the right ear at exactly the right time. He has sent the ravens. He has warned the people who need warning. He has not yet moved against Cersei, because moving against Cersei before the Tyrells are prepared is simply trading one catastrophe for another. He waits. He is not good at waiting. He has never been good at waiting. But he sits in the Hand's Tower as the days pass, and the city hums its particular southern hum below him, and he performs the patience that has never come naturally to him, because the alternative is acting too soon and watching everything collapse in the wrong order. What he does not know, what he cannot know yet, sitting in that room above the city with his ravens already in flight, is that one of the men he trusted to send them has been watched, that the movement of birds from the Hand's Tower is noted and recorded by people whose employment depends on exactly this kind of attention, that somewhere in the lower reaches of the castle, in a room with no windows and a door that locks from the outside, a report is being written. The report does not know what was in the messages, but it knows that messages were sent. It knows the timing, and it knows, with the particular confidence of someone who has already arranged several pieces of this situation to their satisfaction, that the hand of the king is no longer simply investigating a dead man. He has started to fight back. In the solar of Cersei Lannister, a candle burns very late. She reads the report. She sets it down. She picks up her wine and does not drink it, holding the cup in both hands the way a person holds something when they need to think clearly, and their hands need something to do. She looks at the fire for a long time. Then she calls for her brother, and the servant who goes to find him moves quickly, because the queen's voice when she issued the summons had a particular quality to it. Not anger, not quite. Something cooler, something more considered than anger. Jaime enters the solar and closes the door behind him. He reads her face the way only he can read it, and he goes very still. She tells him that Ned Stark has sent ravens south and north within the same night. He asks her what she wants to do. She looks at him across the candlelight, and in her green eyes there is the calm of someone who has decided that patience has served its purpose, and that the time for patience is finished. The patience is finished, and what follows from its ending will reshape the realm. Cersei moves at dawn. The Gold Cloaks receive their orders through channels she has spent years quietly cultivating. Loyalties purchased not with gold alone, but with favors banked and debts remembered, and the particular security that comes from knowing the Queen's eye is upon you. Ned Stark walks into the throne room believing he holds the advantage, believing that the letters he has sent will serve as armor, that the truth of Joffrey's parentage is a sword he can hold at her throat without ever drawing it. He is wrong. He is wrong because he still thinks in the language of honor, and honor has never been the tongue in which this city speaks. The Gold Cloaks take him. His household guard dies on the steps of the throne room, and Ned Stark goes to his knees on cold stone, and Cersei watches from the gallery above with those steady green eyes, and for one long moment she permits herself the satisfaction of it. She does not know about the ravens yet. She does not know what that single night of correspondence has already set in motion. In Winterfell, Robb Stark reads his father's letter once, and then reads it again. And then he does not read it a third time because there's no need. He calls his bannermen. He does not waver, does not deliberate, does not sit for long councils weighing the cost of war against the cost of inaction, because his father has told him plainly what is happening and what it will mean, and Robb Stark is not yet old enough to talk himself out of his instincts, which in this case happen to be correct. The North begins to move. It moves slowly at first, the way a great engine moves, groaning, gathering, and then with increasing momentum as the word spreads from keep to keep, from hall to hall, until all those ancient houses that remember what it means to follow a Stark begin to ride. In Highgarden, the letter arrives not to Mace Tyrell, but to his mother, because Olenna reads everything first, because she has always read everything first, because that is the habit of someone who understands that information is the only currency that does not devalue with time. She reads it once, she does not read it again. She calls for her son. When Mace arrives, she hands him the letter with a particular expression on her face, the expression of someone who has anticipated a problem and is now watching the problem arrive precisely on schedule. Mace reads it and turns red and begins to speak about honor and outrage and the proper response of noble houses. Olenna lets him speak. She waits for the silence that follows, and into that silence she places her actual instructions, methodically, one after another, the way you place stones to build something that will not fall. The Tyrell response is not merely diplomatic. It was never going to be merely diplomatic. What Cersei has calculated, what she has balanced so carefully in that late-night solar with Jaime's face illuminated by candlelight, is a Lannister gambit against the North, a single enemy. A distant one, slow to muster, separated from the South by hundreds of miles of road and weather. What she has not calculated is the South rising alongside it. What she has not calculated is that Jon Snow's marriage to Margaery Tyrell means that Ned Stark is not merely the Lord of Winterfell. He is family to Highgarden. He is connected by the living bond of that contract and that alliance to the most powerful house in the South after the Lannisters themselves. To imprison him is to imprison a father-in-law of the Tyrells. To execute him would be something the realm would not forget. Tywin Lannister understands this instantly. He is at Casterly Rock when the word reaches him, and what crosses his face when he reads the report is not alarm. Tywin Lannister does not permit himself alarm, but rather the expression of a man recalculating rapidly, of someone who has been presented with a variable he did not include in his original equation, and who is already running the new numbers. He writes to King's Landing that same day. The letter is short. It is colder than the stone walls of the rock. It says, in essence, that Joffrey will not execute Ned Stark, and it does not say this as a suggestion. Joffrey receives the letter the way Joffrey receives all instructions that diminish him. With a fury so complete, it becomes almost structural, like the foundation of something he is building inside himself, some architecture of grievance that will outlast every particular injury and become simply the shape of him. He wants Ned Stark's head. He says this loudly in open court, in front of servants and lords and minor functionaries, who will all carry the words back through 100 channels to 100 ears. He says it with the absolute certainty of someone who has never encountered a desire he was told he could not eventually satisfy. Sansa Stark pleads for her father's life on her knees before the throne, and it is the sight of her that gives Cersei a pause she hides expertly, because even Cersei understands that what is coming cannot be stopped by Ned Stark's death, only made bloodier. The restraint does not come from mercy, it comes from mathematics. Two enemies moving simultaneously, Stark steel from the north, Tyrell gold from the south, and the Lannister position is a vice closing from both directions. Ned Stark remains alive in the black cells beneath the Red Keep, which is not mercy, but it is not yet death either. It is a problem deferred. Joffrey sits on the Iron Throne with blood in his eyes and a grandfather's letter cooling his fury like water thrown on a fire he intends to relight. In the black cells, Ned Stark sits in the dark and breathes, and the ravens fly, and the armies move. And far to the south, in a Tyrell manse in King's Landing, Olenna Tyrell pours herself a small glass of wine and tells her granddaughter that whatever happens next, Margaery must be visible, must be present, must ensure that every person in this city who matters knows that the Tyrells have not looked away. The ravens fly north before the ink has dried on the letters that carry them. This is the first calculation, and it is Margaery's. She reads the message twice in the solar at Winterfell, standing near the fire with the parchment held flat between both hands, and she does not make a sound. The fire is loud in that room. The wind off the moors presses against the shuttered windows with a low, persistent moan, and she reads the words a third time, not because she has failed to understand them, but because understanding something and accepting it are two different forms of knowledge, and she is making certain she has both. Her father imprisoned, the Lannisters moving through the Red Keep like an occupation, Joffrey crowned and screaming, and Cersei behind him, perfectly still, a woman who was planned for exactly this, and found it exactly as she imagined. Jon comes to her. He does not wait to be summoned. He reads the letter in her hands without taking it from her, standing close enough that she can feel the cold still coming off his riding leathers, and when he finishes reading, he is quiet for a long moment. Not the quiet of a man who does not know what to say, the quiet of a man who already knows what must be done and is deciding only how to say it without it sounding like what it is, which is war. My father is alive, he says. It is not a question. It is a conclusion he is testing against the air, the way a man tests ice before he trusts it with his weight. Margaery sets the letter down on the table between them. For now, she says, and the precision of those two words contains everything, not a cruelty, a coordinate. Now is the only window that matters. The council that forms in that solar room is not a formal thing. There are no banners hung, no tables set with ritual gravity. There is a fire, and there are people who understand the board they are sitting on, and there's a map unrolled across the table with stones placed at Casterly Rock and King's Landing, and the Reach's northern borders. Lord Mathis Rowan stands at one end of the table, a Tyrell bannerman who has ridden with Margaery's household since before her marriage, and who carries in his bearing the particular solidity of a man whose loyalty has never once been in question. Sir Wendell Manderly is there, two of Jon's own household guard, men who have known him since boyhood, and who look at him now across the table as though they are seeing him for the first time. The question on the table is not whether to march. The question is how. Jon wants to ride south immediately. This is his first instinct, and it is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. A lone avenger on the King's Road is a target. A lord of the North with an army at his back is a different kind of problem entirely. Margaery says this without condescension, without softening it, because they are past softening. She says it as a strategist speaks to another strategist, and Jon listens. What is decided in that room has the feel of something that was always going to happen, as though the marriage itself was always pointing here, to this moment, to two houses looking at a map together and tracing the lines of a movement that the Lannisters did not plan for because they could not have planned for it. The North and the Reach have never moved together. There is no historical framework for it. Tywin Lannister has spent 40 years understanding the pieces on the board, and this particular combination was not on the board before Robert Baratheon looked at a young wolf's son and saw an opportunity. Margaery writes 3 letters. They go by separate ravens because she will not trust this to a single bird. One to Loras, who will understand the military brevity of what she is asking before he finishes reading it. One to her father, who will need more words and more reassurance, because Mace Tyrell moves on confidence the way a ship moves on wind, and she will give him that wind. And one to Olenna, who is already in King's Landing, and who will need nothing explained at all. Only a signal, a word, a confirmation that the game has shifted from waiting to moving. Olenna's reply arrives in 4 days. It is 6 sentences long, which from Olenna is practically a volume. The Stormlands lords are being worked carefully, the way old wood is worked. Slowly, with grain, with patience. Lord Penrose has already received a private visit from a Tyrell steward carrying nothing but a reminder. Robert Baratheon is dead because of Lannister ambition. His memory sits poorly in certain hearts. Olenna understands which hearts those are, and she presses on them gently, like a thumb finding an old bruise. She does not ask these lords to declare, not yet. She only asks them to wait, and to remember, and to consider which of the 2 armies now gathering in the realm is marching in the name of the king Robert chose. Robb is harder to convince than the Stormlands lords. He rides south from his patrols to meet Jon in the Great Hall, and the 2 of them stand by the cold hearth and speak in low voices for a long time. Robb wants to ride with his brother. He says it plainly without performance, because Robb Stark does not perform grief or loyalty. He simply has them, close to the surface, unapologetic. Jon understands this. He has always understood this. Someone has to hold the North, Jon says. He does not finish the rest. He does not need to. The Iron Islands have been quiet, which is the kind of quiet that has a weight to it, the weight of something contained rather than absent. Theon Greyjoy walks the halls of Winterfell as a ward and not a prisoner, and yet the distinction has always been thinner than courtesy suggests. And both Jon and Robb know that Balon Greyjoy reads every weakness the mainland shows as an invitation. The North cannot empty itself southward. It cannot hollow its own spine to make a point. Robb knows this. He has always known this. He simply needed to hear it said. He grips Jon's arm at the door of the Great Hall, and there is no ceremony to it, only the pressure of it, the way men hold each other when they are not certain of the next time. Jon does not look back as he walks out into the yard, where his horse is already saddled, where the column is forming in the gray morning light. Northern spearmen in their thick wool and their direwolf banners, and alongside them, the golden roses of the Reach on green fields. The Tyrell household guard who have wintered at Winterfell, and who now ride south with the same purpose. A sight that would have seemed impossible a year ago, and which now simply is. The vanguard moves at dawn, Jon Stark at its head, Margaery beside him. Not behind, not in a carriage, but beside him, on a gray mare that she handles with the same quiet confidence she brings to every room she enters. The column stretches back along the King's Road as the light grows, and the sound of it, boots and hooves and the low rhythmic clink of armor, carries across the flat frozen fields like a declaration that has not yet been spoken aloud. In Casterly Rock, a raven arrives at roughly the same hour that Jon's column passes the last visible boundary of Winterfell's outer walls, and the man who reads it goes very still. He reads it again. Then he sets it down and calls for his steward, because the thing he has been managing, the Lannister position, the careful architecture of control that depends above all on its enemies not cooperating with one another, has just changed in a way that requires recalculating everything. Both fronts simultaneously, steel from the north, gold from the south. The vice he feared is becoming real. He does not panic. He is not built for it. But he calls for his steward, and he unfolds his own maps, and somewhere in the lines of his face is the recognition that the board he understood yesterday is not the board he is looking at today. The raven reaches them before nightfall. It comes ahead of any formal messenger, ahead of any official proclamation, carried on wings that do not understand the weight of what they bear. A single bird landing at the edge of the column's forward camp as the last light bleeds out of the sky, and the letter it carries is brief. Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, has ordered the execution of Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, Hand of the King. The deed is done. The man is gone. Jon reads it once. He does not read it again. There is a stillness that comes over certain men in moments of catastrophic news. Not the stillness of acceptance, but the stillness of a blade before it falls, when everything that follows has already been decided, but the body has not yet received the instruction. The men nearest to him see it happen. They watch his face go through something they will spend years trying to describe. A grief that does not weep, a fury that does not shout, a cold collapse inward of everything that was still private about him. And then they watch it close, seal itself, a door shutting over a furnace. He does not speak for a long time. What Joffrey Baratheon has done is not merely political miscalculation. It is not only the execution of a man who might have been traded, bargained, used as leverage in the careful language of noble hostage-keeping. What he has done is remove the last living argument for restraint from every soldier in the northern column. Every man who marches under the direwolf of House Stark has a father somewhere, a lord he was sworn to, a reason that felt abstract until this moment and now feels entirely, terrifyingly personal. The grief that moves through the camp that night is not quiet. It is the kind that travels, campfire to campfire, tent to tent, and transforms itself as it moves from sorrow into something harder, something that sharpens rather than dulls, something that wakes men up at midnight and makes them check the edge of their steel. Margaery finds him standing alone at the edge of the firelight. She does not approach him with softness. She has made a calculation about what softness will cost them in this moment, and the number is too high. She stands beside him, and she lets the silence hold for a breath. 2, 3, long enough to acknowledge what is real. Then she speaks. She tells him that mourning is a thing that must be earned, that his father's life, the honor of it, the quiet, ferocious dignity of it, will either mean nothing or mean everything. And that distinction belongs entirely to what comes next. That Joffrey made this decision believing it would shatter the North's resolve, believing a leaderless grief would send men stumbling home to their keeps and their fires, and that if she is right about what she has seen in him, in this army, in the thing that moves through these combined ranks like a current beneath still water, then Joffrey has made the last great error of a reign that will not last the year. She does not say she is sorry. She will say it later, she tells him, when they can afford it. when the thing is done. Jon looks at her for a long moment. Then we move at dawn, he says. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. The Lannister force waiting at the crossroads is capable. It is well positioned, anchored on a ridge that controls the road in both directions, commanded by a man who served 30 years under men who understood the geometry of pitched battle. What it is not prepared for is the pace. Jon's column arrives half a day before any scout has predicted, moving at a speed that speaks not to military discipline alone, but to something rawer underneath it. An army that has converted its grief into fuel and is burning it clean. The northern infantry hits the ridge's left flank before the sun has fully cleared the horizon, and the Reach cavalry, riding hard from the south under Tyrell banners, comes in from the right with the precision of people who have been planning this particular moment for weeks. The Lannister commander holds for longer than most men would. That should be noted. He is not a coward, and his soldiers are not poorly led. But the hammer and the anvil arriving simultaneously, with no gap between them large enough for retreat, is a tactical problem that has no elegant solution, only degrees of loss. By mid-morning, the ridge has fallen. By noon, the road is clear. Jon moves through the aftermath of it, like a man doing arithmetic. He checks on the wounded. He speaks to the men who distinguish themselves. He ensures the dead on both sides are treated with the dignity of soldiers rather than the contempt of enemies, which is a detail that will be remembered, a detail that will travel, a detail that will reach ears far from this crossroads and begin to do its quiet, patient work on the shape of his reputation. He does not celebrate. Margaery watches him from a distance, and she is calculating something. Has been calculating it for days now, ever since the Raven. A problem with variables that are only beginning to resolve themselves into something like an answer. The question is not whether Jon can win a war. She knew that before the first tent was struck on the King's Road. The question is what he will do with one. A second raven arrives as the light begins to turn. This one not from the south and not from King's Landing, but from a direction no one expected, sealed with a sigil that makes the Maester's hand go still before he brings it forward. And Jon breaks the seal alone. There is no ceremony to it, no candlelight arranged for significance, no trusted men summoned to witness. He sends the Maester away with a courtesy that leaves no room for argument, and he stands in the narrow privacy of a commandeered farmlord's solar, with mud still drying on his boots and the smell of the day's dead still faint in the air outside, and he reads what Varys has sent him. He reads it twice. Then he sets it down on the table and looks at it as though it might move. What if the thing a man fears most is not death, not failure, not the ruin of everyone he loves, but the discovery that the ground beneath his entire life was never solid to begin with? What if the fear is not of falling, but of learning, too late, that there was never anything to stand on? The letter is not a declaration. Varys is too careful for declarations. It is fragments. Phrasing chosen with the precision of a man who has spent a lifetime communicating in distances, who knows that the most dangerous truths are the ones stated almost completely and then left unfinished. There is a lineage referenced without names attached. There is a date and a place, and the careful suggestion that certain records held in Old Town bear an annotation that no one has thought to look for, because no one has known to look. There is a sentence near the bottom that Jon reads 3 times and will read again in the dark hours before dawn. A sentence that ends not with a claim, but with a question. A question shaped like a mirror held up at an angle, showing not a face, but its implication. He does not finish the thought that begins to form in response. He does not need to. The thought finishes itself. He finds Margaery in the smaller of the 2 rooms they have claimed for the night, already reading correspondence of her own, with the focused quiet of someone who never truly stops working. She looks up, reads his face before he speaks a single word, and sets her letters aside. He tells her, "Not everything. There is not everything to tell yet, but enough." He watches her the way a man watches a flame he has just introduced to something unfamiliar, waiting to learn whether it will catch or simply gutter out. She does not interrupt. She does not recoil. She listens with that particular quality of attention she has that makes the listener feel simultaneously safe and observed. And when he finishes, she is quiet for a moment that stretches just long enough to be deliberate. What if a woman raised in the mathematics of Highgarden, trained to see every piece on the board and calculate its movement 3 turns ahead, is precisely the right mind to receive a secret that would unmake a lesser one? What if the right response to a revelation that could shatter a dynasty is not horror but strategy? Not the intake of breath, but the slow, careful exhale of someone beginning to calculate. She does not tell him the secret is a gift, because she is not careless with her words. She tells him it is a blade, and that a blade is only dangerous when drawn. She tells him that a hidden blade held correctly is more powerful than a sword raised in open challenge. That the man who knows he could speak and chooses silence carries a weapon no one can see or plan against. She tells him not to act. She tells him not to deny. She tells him to hold it, to let it be the thing beneath the thing, the weight no one else can feel, but which changes the shape of every room he enters. He looks at her for a long moment. He does not ask how she knows these things. He has stopped asking how Margaery knows things. What he feels is not ambition. This matters. It must be said clearly, because it matters. What moves through Jon in the hours after is not the hunger of a man who has discovered an inheritance, but the nausea of a man who has discovered that the story he believed about himself was someone else's story, told to protect him from a truth no child could have survived knowing. He thinks of Ned Stark. He thinks of the gray eyes and the quiet voice and the honor that never bent. He thinks of a man who carried a lie for decades like a stone in the chest and never once let it show. And he understands for the first time and completely that the lie was love. The nausea does not pass. He does not expect it to. Across the narrow sea, in a city of smoke and ambition, a different kind of reckoning is in motion. Reports have been arriving for weeks now, carried by merchants, by exiles, by the particular network of whispers that Daenerys Targaryen has spent years cultivating with the patience of someone who believes absolutely in her eventual arrival. Most of the reports are tactical. Troop movements, alliance shifts, the fracturing of Lannister authority along the arterial roads of the Westerlands. But one name keeps returning in the dispatches, attached each time to details that Ser Jorah watches his queen absorb with an attention slightly different from the attention she gives to everything else. A northern lord, a Stark name, a description of the way he fights and the way he leads and the way his men speak of him. which is not the way men in Westeros typically speak of lords. And Daenerys does not comment on this name, not directly, but her eyes go to the middle distance when it is spoken aloud, and Ser Jorah notes the pattern with a worry he cannot yet name, but reaches for his pen to record, because in his experience, the things Daenerys grows quiet about are precisely the things that end up changing everything. The night deepens over the camp. Jon sits awake while Margaery sleeps, the letter no longer on the table. Burned, as she advised, the ash scattered, nothing left that could be read by other eyes. But the words are in him now, permanent as marrow. He stares at the dark and thinks of dragons. He thinks of a name he was not given and a fire he did not ask for. And somewhere in the distance, a raven is already lifting from a tower, carrying a message he has not yet sent, but which has, in some way, he cannot yet articulate, already been decided. The walls of King's Landing have stood for nearly 3 centuries. They have absorbed the weight of dynasties, the noise of coronations, the particular silence that follows executions. They are not merely stone. They are intention made permanent. A king's declaration that here is the center of the world and everything beyond these walls is periphery. But walls are curious things. They are built to keep enemies out. They are less often considered as the thing that keeps subjects in. The army that arrives from the north and east does not come screaming. It does not arrive in chaos. It moves with the unhurried certainty of something that has already calculated the outcome and found it satisfactory. Jon Snow rides at the front not because it is the safest position, but because it is the one that can be seen from the walls, and what the men standing those walls see matters enormously. What they see is a man in gray and black, a direwolf on his sigil, and a Tyrell rose stitched beside it, moving at a pace that suggests he has nowhere more important to be. Because he does not. This is the most important place, and he knows it, and he allows them to see that he knows it. Margaery does not ride with the visible vanguard. This is deliberate. She is already inside the city, in a manner of speaking. She's been inside for weeks. The Tyrell network does not announce itself. It does not travel in columns or carry banners. It travels in covered wagons carrying grain, in the cloaks of merchants, in the hands of servants who have worked in particular households long enough to know which doors open quietly and which ones creak. The small folk of King's Landing have been hungry before. Joffrey's court does not trouble itself much with the condition of people who cannot vote, because in Westeros, people cannot vote. But this particular hunger has been sharpened by rumor, and the rumors have been carefully placed. What the king did to the man who knelt and begged. What was done to Lord Stark on those steps. What was done to a girl simply for having the wrong father. The stories are true. That is what makes them so effective. Margaery's agents do not need to fabricate. They only need to ensure that the truth travels. By the time the siege lines are drawn, the grain wagons have already done their work. The message inside the grain is not written anywhere. It does not need to be. It is transmitted through the act of feeding itself. Someone outside these walls thinks of you, which is more than can be said for someone inside them. Tywin Lannister moves because Tywin Lannister always moves. He is not a man who accepts positioning as permanent. He is a man who looks at the board and asks himself which piece, moved where, restores the advantage, and then he moves it. The relief column he sends from the west is significant. It is meant to break the siege from behind, to split the attention of the combined army, to remind everyone watching that the Lannisters have not exhausted themselves yet. Loras Tyrell is waiting on the road because Margaery told him to be waiting on the road. The engagement is not long. It is not particularly complex. Loras does not need complexity. He needs speed and precision and an intimate understanding of terrain that the Lannister column does not share, because Loras has ridden every road his sister told him to know, and Tywin's commander has not. The column is intercepted in a valley that looks, from the high road, like a perfectly reasonable place to travel through. It is not a reasonable place. By the time this is apparent, the repositioning required to correct the error is the kind that cannot be completed before the arrows begin. What Tywin receives is not a report of victory. What he receives is silence where a relief force used to be. And Tywin Lannister, alone in whatever room he occupies when the news does not come, understands the silence perfectly. There will be no salvation from the west. The city will fall on the timeline the city will fall on, and no Lannister column will alter that arithmetic now. Joffrey's response is the response of a boy who has mistaken cruelty for power for so long that he no longer understands the difference. He places Sansa Stark on the walls. He sends word that she will remain there, visible, until the siege lifts. It is not a subtle message. It is not meant to be subtle. It is meant to demonstrate that he still holds something of value, that there is still a cost to pressing forward. Jon's reply comes the same evening. It is delivered not just to the gates, but read aloud at every point along the siege line where voices can carry. He does not negotiate with threats held over the innocent. He does not do this not because he cannot bear the thought of Sansa's suffering. He can, and it costs him something visible and human to say the words. But because he understands what Joffrey does not, that the moment a wall yields, it yields from the inside first. The message that travels into the city is simple. Any gate opened from within will be answered with mercy. Not negotiation, not terms to be debated. Mercy, extended as a fact. 3 days pass, then 4. Then on the 5th evening, in the last gray light before dark, a minor gate on the eastern approach, a grain gate, old, barely wide enough for 2 men abreast, begins slowly to move. The gate opens not with fanfare, but with the sound of old iron giving way. A low groan, almost reluctant, as though the city itself is uncertain whether it has chosen rightly. 2 men push it from within. They are not soldiers. They are a baker and his apprentice, both flour-dusted and hollow-eyed from weeks of diminishing stores, and they stand aside as the first riders pass through with their hands visible and their weapons sheathed. Jon Snow rides at the head of that column. Margaery Tyrell rides beside him. What follows in King's Landing in the hours after that grain gate opens is, by any measure, the rarest of outcomes. Cities do not fall gently. History has not been kind enough to provide many examples of an army entering a defeated capital and choosing, in the heat of that first blood-warm hour, to hold itself back. The temptation of a fallen city is ancient and almost biological. The loosening of order, the sense that ordinary rules have been suspended, that what is taken cannot be considered stolen. Jon understands this temptation, not as an abstraction, but as a thing he can feel moving through the men behind him, a current beneath the discipline he has spent months building. He does not wait for it to surface. Before the column is 3 streets deep into the city, his orders have already moved ahead of him, carried by riders sent through every parallel lane and avenue. There is to be no looting. There are to be no reprisal killings. Any man who raises a weapon against a civilian will answer for it before sundown. The orders are not requests. They are stated as facts already in effect, as though the law arrived in King's Landing slightly before the army did. The small folk watch from doorways and upper windows. They have seen armies before. They know what armies do. And so, when the soldiers pass and the doors are still on their hinges, and the fires do not start, and the screaming does not begin, the silence that follows has a texture to it. Confused at first, then cautious, then something approaching wonder. A woman in the Street of Flower steps out from her doorway, holding a child on her hip, and watches Jon's banner pass. She does not cheer. She is too exhausted and too suspicious for cheering, but she watches and she remembers, and that watching matters more than cheering ever could. Joffrey is taken before nightfall. He is found not on the Iron Throne, but in a lower corridor of the Red Keep, moving toward a passage that leads to the old dragon crypts beneath the hill. Not fleeing, his escort insists, merely inspecting the fortifications. No one believes this, including Joffrey himself, though he maintains a performance of contempt through the entire encounter that impresses no one and costs him considerably. He is unharmed. This is deliberate. Jon has given explicit instruction that he is to be taken alive, treated without unnecessary cruelty, and held under secure guard until a lawful trial can be convened. The men who capture him are less enthusiastic about these instructions than Jon would prefer, but they comply. They comply because he has built, slowly and at real cost, an army that trusts his judgment, even when his judgment asks something of them. The calls for immediate execution come quickly. They come from lords who have waited years for this moment, from men who lost fathers and brothers and sons to Joffrey's whims, from voices inside and outside the council who argue that a public trial is a luxury that creates risk without creating benefit. Margaery sits in those early councils and says very little. She does not need to say much. What she offers is presence, a steadiness beside Jon that signals to the room that this is not Jon's position alone, that the Tyrells stand behind it, that the political weight of the Reach and the Stormlands and the Northern alliances have all arrived at the same conclusion. Joffrey will face trial, and through that trial, the new order will demonstrate its first and most essential difference from the order it has replaced. The Lannisters ruled through fear and through the arbitrary application of power. What is being built now rests on something different, something more fragile and more durable at once. It rests on the idea that the law applies even to kings, especially to kings. Cersei is another matter. She does not rage when the verdict of her exile is delivered. She sits very still and looks at Jon with an expression that is difficult to categorize. Not defeat, not quite, but something like the moment before a fire goes out, when it is still technically burning. Her titles are stripped with procedural efficiency. Casterly Rock will hold her under permanent guard, the arrangements made through channels so thoroughly documented that no future court could claim ambiguity about her status. Myrcella and Tommen are placed in neutral regency, their wardship assigned to lords chosen precisely because they owe nothing to either side of the conflict that has just ended. Tywin Lannister accepts these arrangements in silence. He sits through the proceedings that determine the fate of his house and his legacy and says nothing, which is, for Tywin Lannister, a kind of speech in itself. The Lannister grip on Westeros that long, cold, calculating hold releases, not dramatically, not with a final declaration or a grand confrontation. It simply becomes clear over the course of 2 days of careful negotiation that there is nothing left to grip. The gold remains, the castle remains, but the power those things once commanded has passed into other hands, and Tywin is old enough and honest enough with himself, in the privacy of his own mind, to understand that it will not return in his lifetime. On the 3rd morning after the city falls, Jon walks the length of the throne room alone. The Iron Throne sits at the far end of the hall, as it has always sat. Grotesque, enormous, assembled from the weapons of the defeated, and never designed for comfort. He stands before it for a long time. He does not sit. He has not sat in it since the city fell, and the advisors who surround him are beginning to notice the distinction between a king who has won a throne and a king who has chosen what to do about it. It is Margaery who finds him there, and she stands beside him in the thin morning light, and they look at it together without speaking for long enough that the silence acquires its own weight. Then she asks him a question, quietly, with the particular precision she reserves for the moments that matter. And whatever she asks him, the answer she receives makes something shift in the way he stands, some tension easing from his shoulders. He turns from the throne. There is a meeting scheduled for that afternoon. Sansa has sent word from the north. The message is brief and carries a tone that Jon has learned over years of knowing her, signals something serious beneath the careful language. Sansa's message arrives ahead of her, which is how it always is with her. She does not send ravens carelessly. Every word she commits to parchment has been weighed, turned over, considered from multiple angles before the bird is loosed. And so, when her letters arrive short, they are not brief because there is little to say. They are brief because she has distilled something enormous down to its essential shape and trusts the recipient to understand the weight beneath the surface. Jon understands. He has always understood Sansa in the way that siblings understand each other across distance and silence, and when he reads her words that morning, standing in the dim corridor outside the small council chamber, he reads them twice and then folds the parchment with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who needs a moment before he speaks. Bran's ravens, she writes, a full account. Howland Reed has come south. That is all she commits to the page. That is enough. Howland Reed is a small man who carries large things. He arrives in the capital within the week, weathered from travel, quiet in the manner of men who have kept secrets so long that silence has become a kind of posture, something they wear without thinking, a habit of the spine. He brings with him 2 others, survivors of a moment that the realm has mostly forgotten, a skirmish at a tower in Dorne that the official histories have described only in the vaguest terms, if they have described it at all. Jon meets with them in a room that has no windows, a room chosen deliberately, a room where the acoustics are poor and voices do not carry, and he listens. He does not interrupt. He does not move for long stretches of it in the way that a man goes still when something inside him is reorganizing itself around new information too significant to process through ordinary motion. What Howland Reed lays before him is not a surprise, not precisely, not in the deepest chamber of whatever Jon knows about himself without having been told. But knowing a thing in the wordless, formless way one sometimes does, and having that thing confirmed by witnesses, corroborated, documented, committed to testimony. These are different experiences. One lives in the body as a kind of weather. The other lands like stone, Rhaegar Targaryen, Lyanna Stark. A marriage conducted in secret, outside the sight of a realm already burning, outside the sight of a king whose madness had made secrecy a survival skill for everyone around him. A child born in a tower, passed to Ned Stark's arms, carried north under a story that was a lie built entirely out of love, a name given not to diminish, but to protect. Jon, not Aegon. Jon because Aegon needed to disappear, and Jon Stark of Winterfell was the shape of the disappearance. He sits with this for a long time after the witnesses have been quietly, carefully housed in the keep. He sits with it until Margaery comes. She does not knock, which means she already knows at least the shape of it. Word moves through a castle the way water moves, not through the main channels, but through the cracks, and Margaery has always known where the cracks are. She closes the door behind her and looks at him, and for a moment neither of them speaks, and in the silence between them, the entire history of who they are to each other is briefly visible. The arrangement that became something real, the political calculation that produced something neither of them had calculated for. The years of navigating a world that offered them every reason to remain strangers and somehow produced instead this. Two people who have learned each other's weight, who know what the other's stillness means, who can read the specific quality of a silence and know whether it calls for words or simply for presence. She sits across from him. She waits. This is something she does extraordinarily well. The patience of a woman who has learned that the most significant things are often said by the person who speaks second. He tells her plainly, without ceremony, in the same flat and careful voice he uses when he is working very hard to manage something enormous. Aegon Targaryen, last true-born heir of 2 royal lines, a secret kept for close to 20 years, now broken open like ground after a long winter, unavoidable and irrevocable. He does not tell her what it means. He tells her the fact of it, and then he stops, and the room around them feels very large. She does not reach for the political implications immediately. She does not ask about succession or bloodline or what the lords will say. What she says is this, that she did not marry a name, that the man she has stood beside through every negotiation and every loss and every slow grinding victory that has brought the realm to something resembling peace. That man is the man she chose, and she has been choosing him consistently for long enough now that the choosing has become simply the shape of how she moves through the world. Whatever he does with this truth, she tells him, she is not beside him because of what it might make him. She is beside him because of who he has already shown himself to be. It is not a performance. That is perhaps what moves him most. There is no audience in this room, no gallery to play to, no political benefit to be extracted from sincerity in this particular moment. She is simply telling him something true. He makes the decision that night. He does not make it with great drama or long deliberation. He makes it the way he has made most of his significant decisions. In the quiet that follows the storm, when everything has gone still, and the correct answer is simply the one that remains when all the lesser options have been held up to the light and found wanting. Howland Reed will carry the full account to the Citadel. Every detail, every witness, every strand of evidence will be recorded in the archive that the Meisters maintain beneath Old Town, sealed but not destroyed, preserved but not proclaimed, present in the historical record for any future reckoning that history might require. The truth will exist. The truth will simply not become a weapon. and then Jon Stark, Lord Protector of the Seven Kingdoms, will formally renounce, before witnesses, on record, with the specific legal language that makes such things binding, any claim that flows from Targaryen blood, not because the claim is false, because the claim, if pressed, would burn everything they have spent years building, because the realm does not need another dynasty war, because the people who have bled most in the long succession of conflicts that Targaryen ambition has generated deserve, perhaps, to live out their years under a name that does not carry that particular history. He will be Jon Stark. He has always been Jon Stark. The name is not a diminishment. It is a choice, and choices made freely mean more than inheritance received passively. And he has understood this, he thinks, longer than he has understood most things about himself. Margaery witnesses the written decision before he seals it. She reads it carefully, in the manner she reads every significant document, thoroughly, without rushing, noting the precise language in each clause. When she reaches the end, she sets it down and looks at him with an expression that is not quite pride and not quite relief, but contains elements of both. The expression of someone who has seen a thing confirmed that they already believed. She picks up the quill before he can reach for it. She signs her name beneath his as witness, deliberate and unhurried, the letters clean and certain on the page. Outside, the night is settling over the capital, and in the morning there will be lords to summon and language to negotiate, and the particular complexity of announcing to the realm that the truth exists, and simultaneously that the truth changes nothing. That is tomorrow's work, and it is considerable work, and they both know it. But before the morning arrives, a courier reaches the gate with another message, this one bearing a seal that Jon does not immediately recognize. A seal from somewhere in the east, from beyond the narrow sea, from a quarter of the world that has been quiet long enough that its quietness has become, among those who think carefully about such things, its own kind of signal. Jon breaks the seal. He reads the message. Something changes in his expression. Not fear, not quite, but the specific sharpening of a man who has just understood that the board has more pieces on it than he counted. 5 years is not a long time in the life of a kingdom. Empires have crumbled in less. Dynasties have risen and collapsed before a child born at their founding learned to walk. 5 years, measured against the long grinding weight of Westerosi history, is barely a breath. A single turning of seasons, a handful of harvests, a short count of winters and summers that the Meisters would note in their records without particular ceremony. And yet, 5 years after Robert Baratheon pressed his seal into wax and altered the succession of a realm, the world that exists is so fundamentally different from the world that might have been that the distance between them is nearly impossible to calculate. The board was rearranged, the pieces moved, and what emerged from that movement was something that none of the players, not even the most calculating among them, had fully anticipated. Not war, not ruin, not the long catastrophe that Westeros had been quietly rehearsing for decades. What emerged, against all reasonable expectation, was peace. It is not a perfect peace. It never is. There are still disputes along the borders of the Reach and the Westerlands, still lords who mutter into their cups about bloodlines and legitimacy, still the occasional ambitious man who looks at a map and sees opportunity where others see settled order. The East has sent its message, and Jon Snow, Jon Stark, as some now call him, though the name has never been made entirely official, has spent considerable hours in the company of his most trusted advisors, reading and rereading what that message implies. The world beyond the narrow sea does not stay still simply because Westeros has found a moment of stillness. He knows this. He has always known this. But the difference between a realm that faces an eastern threat from a position of unity and one that faces it fractured and bleeding from its own internal wars, that difference is the entire calculation. That difference is everything. The child is called Lyanna. It is Margaery who suggests it first, quietly, in the hours after the birth, when the room is warm and the candles burn low and the weight of the moment sits on both of them like something hallowed. Jon does not speak for a long time. He looks at the small face of his daughter, the dark hair already faintly visible, the absolute stillness of new life finding its rhythm in the world. He does not finish the thought that moves through him. He does not need to. Margaery watches his face and understands what the name would mean to him. Not a monument, not a political gesture, but something private and irreplaceable. An acknowledgement that the woman who never had the chance to see her son grow into what he has become is nonetheless present in all of it, woven into the foundations of everything he has built. Lyanna Stark Tyrell is her name, and it is recorded in the ledgers of both houses with equal ceremony. And when the ravens carry the news from Highgarden to Winterfell to King's Landing to every castle and hold and market town that maintains a master, the celebrations that follow are not the hollow performative celebrations of political obligation. They are genuine. They are the sound of a realm exhaling. The birth is understood intuitively and immediately as the final confirmation of something the alliance between the North and the Reach had been quietly promising for 5 years. That the union was real, that it had taken root, that it would outlast the convenience that created it and become something sturdier and stranger and more lasting than convenience ever produces. Olenna Tyrell receives the news in Highgarden, seated in her garden as she almost always is now, the afternoon light falling across the roses in that particular golden way it has in autumn. She listens to the raven's message read aloud by her attendant. She is quiet for a moment. Then she announces, to no one in particular and with absolute certainty, that the match was entirely her doing, that she saw its potential before anyone else drew breath to consider it, and that the name chosen for the child demonstrates a level of political poetry that she herself would have recommended had anyone thought to ask her. She is not entirely wrong on any count. She lives to say so for another 2 years, which she considers correctly a satisfactory length of time. The snow comes early to Winterfell that year. It arrives without the drama that sometimes accompanies the first real fall of winter. No howling wind, no sudden violence of weather, just a quiet descent of white from a sky that has been the color of old iron for days. Jon stands on the walls in the early evening and watches it come down over the rooftops and the courtyard and the dark shapes of the trees beyond the gate. The world below is settling into silence, the way it does when snow falls thick and undisturbed. The sound of everything softened and then absorbed entirely into the white. Margaery comes to stand beside him. She does not ask what he is thinking. She has learned over 5 years of marriage to a man who spent most of his life learning to be unreadable, that the silence he carries on the walls of Winterfell is not the silence of trouble, but the silence of something very nearly like contentment. She watches the snow with him, their breath rising in small clouds in the cold air, the warmth of the castle at their backs, and their daughter sleeping somewhere inside it. He speaks quietly, almost to himself, as though the thought has been building for years and has simply now found its moment to surface. He says that the throne was never worth what men paid for it. He has seen the accounting, the wars, the burnings, the houses erased from the earth in pursuit of a chair in a cold keep in a city built on someone else's ambition. He has read the histories and walked among the consequences and understood, more clearly than most men who have ever stood close to power, what power extracts from the world in exchange for its presence. The throne costs in blood. It costs in loyalty spent and broken. It costs in the particular hollowness that comes to men who reach for it and find upon arrival that the thing they reached for was never what they imagined. But this, he says, the word is simple, and he does not elaborate immediately, because elaboration would diminish it. He looks at the snow falling over Winterfell, at the ancient stones that have stood through 1,000 winters, at the courtyard where tomorrow there will be children running and the sound of life continuing. He means the North. He means the living world and the people in it. He means the child sleeping warm inside the castle, named for a woman who deserved more than history gave her, carrying both of her parents' blood into a future that neither of them was supposed to reach. He means the peace they built from the ruin of what almost was, the wars that didn't happen, the fires that weren't set, the houses that still stand, because two people were placed beside each other at a feast 5 years ago and found is that proximity something neither of them expected. This, he says again, is worth everything. Margaery takes his hand. Her fingers are cold from the night air, and she laces them through his without looking away from the snow. She does not offer a response, because the moment does not require one. She has always understood that some things are confirmed not by argument, but by presence, by the simple, undeniable fact of standing in a place, beside a person, watching the world do what the world does, and finding that it is enough, more than enough. The snow falls soft and endless over Winterfell, over the Reach and its roses, over the long roads between kingdoms that were once crossed in anger and are now crossed in trade and treaty, and the ordinary traffic of a realm at rest. It falls over the graves of men who spent their lives reaching for a future that someone else ultimately built. It falls over the quiet hours of a kingdom that chose at one pivotal and improbable moment a different arrangement of its pieces, and found in that arrangement something that resembled, however imperfectly, however provisionally, the long and elusive possibility of peace. And that brings us to the end of this story. If you enjoyed it and made it all the way here, please consider subscribing to the channel. I upload new alternate history and lore videos every single day. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.